Hello. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me properly?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. So, hi, good morning, everyone. For today, we'll be presenting Information Systems Management, which is Chapter 14. So, I'm Mikey, and Vlad will also present moving forward in the next session. I mean, in the next part. So, I want to go through the learning objectives for what we're going to present for today. So firstly, we will look at the relationship of IS spending and business benefits. For this one, we just want to ensure that our proposed IT solutions will really deliver business value for our organization. At the same time, next is considering um, location alternatives for an organization's IS function. Meaning, what are the main considerations when deciding where to locate the management of anything IS or IT related in our organization? And finally, we want to assess the arguments for and against outsourcing. So how can we determine if we want to outsource or not? And lastly, what management tools and techniques exist to actually help us evaluate the IS or IT portfolio effectively. I think the previous presentation also delved into IS and IT differentiation. So I think we're very clear on that. So for my part, I want the presentation to be kind of light and very conversational. I'll be asking questions and different things. So I hope people will participate also so that we can, for the session to be more engaging and productive for everybody. So let's go deep dive into our first learning objective. No, I think we are always faced with the situation wherein we don't really know the relationship between IS spending and business benefits. Meaning, hindi natin 100% alam what is the value that we're getting initially and how do we quantify it. So before we can actually dive into it, I just want to ask a question for everyone. So in quarantine, I think many people have been buying stuff, so adding to cart and things, and then improving maybe their work from home setup or anything else. So can you just put in the chat what is the most expensive thing you bought recently? So I'll look into that in a bit. So just please use the chat and then I'll look into it. So for me, what's the most expensive thing that I bought is I bought a how can I say a budget gaming PC. So initially, I'm a very casual gamer, so I don't really play. I just play in my console, and then eventually, some of my friends who are actually playing in the PC said that there's a game that we can play together. So it's a tactical shooter, and then eventually, what happened was I wanted to buy a PC so that I can quote unquote compete with the people who were playing. So that's the initial thing that I was doing at that time. Na I wanted to find a solution, especially when we buy things. No, when we buy something, for example, now or even before, minsan sinasabi natin it's an investment, not really quote unquote an expense, especially kung gusto natin i-justify at a certain point, no, if it's really a good fit for us and gusto lang natin bilhin. So that's where it all starts, I guess, when we're evaluating alternatives and how we also look at our company because we look at it from a perspective um, of investment and value. So I think everyone already knows that at this point, no, we are looking at, alam na natin yan, improving productivity, new opportunities, change in the company, competitive advantage, and even reducing risk and improving organizational strategy moving forward. No? So that's initially what's happening in the companies now. And we're looking at mainly two things, investment and value. So our managers or even us, if we are already at that level, are concerned with the level of investment in the information systems, no? Information system value versus really evaluating the investment. Are we getting enough value from that investment. So that brings me to the second question, no? How do we know in Tagalog, no, nasulit mo ba yung nabili mo? How could we say that we actually were able to get ROI? So for me, it's hard to tell na if this purchase really drove ROI for me because I usually use it on the weekends and stuff. So those kinds of things are the things that we want to consider, no? And I think this is a very Filipino term also. If nasulit mo ba yung pagbili mo ng, let's say, ng system na yan. And I think this is also the thought process of like higher up managers or even executives na gusto nila masulit yung binili nila. And even in our personal lives, I guess, when we have subscription services, parang gusto mo sabihin sarili mo na, nasulit ko ba yung pagbayad ko, for example, ng Netflix for this month because I'm subscribed initially. So those things were really in consideration. And when we're looking at into a more deeper level, no, we want to justify what we want to see. So it is, for example, ROI, no? It's the ratio between net profit and cost of the investment. So minsan tinatanong natin kung na-ROI na ba natin yan. And these other things are also discussed, so I'm not gonna go very deep into it. But estimating the value of an investment based on its expected future cash flows is the discounted cash flow. And we also have net present value, internal rate of return, and payback period. So this is the initial financial justifications when we're looking at initial costs of our projects as well. So yeah, so next one is development costs and operations and maintenance costs. So in terms of how we look at it in now, we have the development cost where usually when we see it, no, binibigay lang sa atin how much it would cost. I would love to give an example that when you're buying, for example, a car, you always think of it. For example, I was like a first buyer of a car a few years ago. Titignan mo lang how much the car would cost initially. For example, that's 800,000 or 1 million, and then how am I gonna finance it? Those kinds of things are always in consideration at the onset. And I think that's the same thing that we're experiencing in organizations, no? Na nakikita nila magkano ba yung gagastusin ko dyan onset, and then eventually, do I have the money to spend on that? But we forget the things that are operations and maintenance na we forget sa operations, for example, for the car, we forget na kailangan nga pala i-change oil yan, kailangan pala i-car wash often, or depending on you, how you want it to be car washed, and then papaayos mo yung aircon and everything else. So the key takeaway is really looking at all the costs, not just the development costs at the onset. And then finally, we also have the benefits. So I think everyone knows already, we already also discussed it in the previous chapter regarding benefits. So it's really gaining, enhancing, and supporting. So gaining better, more customers, enhancing our internal and external communication, and supporting maybe our team members in some way. And one of the things that I really liked about the chapter is discussing about the productivity paradox. This initially means that giving more investment in IT might productivity might go down rather than up. For this one, I think it's not just in IT but in general on how we spend on investing on things. The analogy that I like to give so that we understand it better is that sometimes, for example, we buy things to improve our productivity. For example, since we've been working from home for the longest time, no, you want to improve how your setup works. Baka hindi siya same in the office. So for example, me, I bought like 2 external monitors that I'm using now. So and then at the end of the day, you want to improve your productivity, but sometimes because of maybe that investment that you put into that specific product or solution, it might actually not be super beneficial to you. Like, for example, sa akin, baka because I have really big screen real estate now, yung pwede ko gawin is intensely multitask, or even like maybe watch something on the other side and then do something on the other side of the screen. So this is also very relevant to our company. So that's basically what the paradox says, that sometimes the benefits, for example, the business benefits, let's say improved customer service, uh, are perceived to come from a particular investment that has been assessed initially, of course, in a qualitative way perspective, but would take some time, lag of the paradox. So meaning may lag yan bago mo makita yung benefit niya. When, for example, we want to see the benefit of a HR system. Does it really help our employees? So minsan it's a very hard way to tell na this investment really, for example, we're looking at the bottom line and how this investment really improved it at a certain perspective. So I guess that's how the productivity paradox comes into play in investing in IT solutions, na baka hindi we perceived in our head, no, na this solution for our employees or even our customers are actually helping our company, but maybe not as much as we think it is. So to sum it all up, no, this paradox is mainly telling us that costs are really tangible in nature, but benefits are hard to quantify in monetary value. So that's how that's why it's really hard, really, even for me, to assess these kinds of situations wherein you want to invest in multiple things. For example, what do you want to invest in? Do you want to invest in better customer experience, or even looking at different things such as improving our internal project management system? So it's really hard to quantify the benefits in a monetary perspective. So that's something that we want to take away moving forward when we do cost and benefits in our organization. Next would be the investment categories. So in terms of investing into different systems, there's mainly four mentioned in the book. So first would be the strategic systems and high potential projects. So basically, these things bring change to the how we do business. So it's about innovation, bringing competitive edge, and also research and development oriented projects. And then we also look at key systems and support systems. So for this, it's really carrying out activities for the business more effectively, at the same time improving the business process. So yeah, so we went down to the first learning objective, and then next is we can go to evaluating the location alternatives for an organization's information systems function. So to give a brief background, what this basically is we want to structure how our information systems management would work. When I saw this, it reminded me of also how organizations are structured. I think they're initially in the same scope, wherein we have a centralized one and then a decentralized one. So for centralization, this is basically you have a very strong control. You have a center point here who has the power to decide on most of the things. So for example, you have in your company, let's say your function is you have marketing, you have sales, operations, manufacturing, and then you have your own IT or IS part or department. So usually it would look like this, wherein the power of the control is within IS or IT, and then maybe the functions would just ask something to the IT department for, like, for example, a new technology. So for this, for centralized, the real benefit is the department, let's say the management information systems department, has very good control of everything else, and they can coordinate the activities more easily, and it's simpler initially to control. Pag syempre hindi kalat-kalat yung people mo, you just have it in one department, you know what needs to be done at a specific point. But going into a decentralized kind of fashion, or how decentralized systems work, no, parang I think people are moving towards this even in different organizations, meaning that it's not as structured as it was before. That they want to give each department or each department some degree of autonomy. Meaning, for example, in this kind of setup, it really depends on how they want to set it up. So, for example, it might happen that in marketing, there's a specific people who are doing IT related work. And then we have, of course, also in operations and in sales. So for this approach, it's really giving the team an opportunity to respond fast. And then there's no competition for resources, no, for this one. If you can imagine having a centralized system of if you work for a company before na medyo ganon, na you have to do intense requests na parang, I want to change something here. Then the the IT department man say, yeah, we can do that maybe in 4 months. So initially, that's how that it might happen coming from these kind of structure. So there's also a sweet spot, no, when we see these kinds of things happening in the organization. So there is also what we call a hybrid type of um, a hybrid system wherein it's a combination of both. Like there is a degree of decentralization, meaning it's similar to this one, but there is still an overall uh, information systems management department in the company, managing everything, managing it, and also having it easier for everyone to build systems faster. And then there's a harmonious IS and good business relationship because um, with that kind of approach, the business, for example, the owners of the product or let's say the product owners can really talk to the IT people and be and for the requirements to easily be facilitated and a better customer experience for whatever they're building. So that's for the structure of information systems management. So we have decentralized and also centralized. And then next would be how do we really structure this? How do we know what we choose? From the book, we always want to go back to corporate strategy, meaning is the IT function just uh, doing it for maybe internal support? Or is it really looking into a bigger perspective where our strategy within our systems is really ingrained even towards our customers and everything else? So is it related to all functional areas or is it just related maybe our solution is just for or what we're building, what we're doing is really just towards operations, not really looking at other functions. So it really have to be in tune with what we want to do moving forward and how we want to manage it. And next would be the organizational shape. Shape would basically mean how the organization is structured as of this point. For example, do you have branches in the other countries? For example, you have one in US and then in Australia and then in the Philippines. So that's where you look at how you want to manage everything since the system will be used in the whole world and how will we support that. And great thing that I saw in the chapter is looking it outward and inward as well. So to give a brief background, what that means is that mainly when we're looking at it inward, we're just looking at the company itself. Like let's say its employees, its departments, and everything else. So it's mainly a support capability rather than a strategic one. But when we're outward looking, it's really more of looking at it at a perspective where we want to see it as a competitive edge on us, wherein our systems also affect our customers, our suppliers, and everything else externally. So that enables us better communications and better communication strategy for all stakeholders, external or internal to the company. So initially, that's what the whole 2 points of the chapter boils down to. So now I'll be giving the floor to Vlad to discuss more regarding the chapter. I'll stop presenting and then Vlad, you can take the floor. Thank you.
Hello. Okay, so for my part, for the first half of my presentation, I will be discussing about outsourcing and the arguments for and against it. And then after that, I will be discussing about how to manage outsourcing once we have learned all the arguments for and against it. So let's first discuss what outsourcing is. I think this is already common knowledge to all of us. Outsourcing is delegating a certain function of a company to a third party. So when we talk about outsourcing, there are also 6 types, as mentioned in the readings. So the first type is hardware outsourcing, which is renting time on a high-capacity mainframe computers. So I think the best example for this would be like Amazon Web Services, right? Because at first they invested in a lot of these infrastructure and then realized they don't use it all the time, so might as well rent it. So the customers that subscribe to that are actually doing the hardware outsourcing to Amazon. So it's kind of like that. And the next type of outsourcing would be network management. So this is outsourcing just the function of managing the network to the third party. And then the third type is outsourcing systems development, where the third party develops and modifies bespoke systems for the company. I think this is also a very common type of outsourcing company here in the Philippines. I think some examples that come to my mind are like Accenture and others. So there are probably more which are smaller. But basically, outsourcing systems development is outsourcing, of course, the software engineering part to a third party. And then the next is IS support. IS support is when a specific company outsources just the customer service, both internal and external, uh, to a third party. I think this is the largest outsourcing industry in the Philippines. And I think I've read somewhere that the Philippines is number 2 in the world in terms of IS support. Uh, so basically, that's it. And for the last two, they are management of IS strategy and total outsourcing. They may seem similar, where they are where certain functions are being, I mean, whole functions are being outsourced to the third-party vendor. But the difference between management of IS strategy and total outsourcing is that with management of IS strategy, the final say will still go to the client firm, whereas with total outsourcing, the outsourcing company will be given like a full control over the function or the unit that was outsourced to them. So why do companies outsource? So the Outsourcing Institute mentioned the top 10 reasons, which are accelerated engineering benefits, access to world-class capabilities, cash infusion, and so forth. Now, if you would read these 10 top 10 reasons to outsource, I think they can be reduced and summarized into 5 main reasons. So number one is cost reduction. I think this is already this is what everyone thinks of when they think of outsourcing. I think part of any business operation is to make sure that the cost of operating is actually reduced. So mostly when it comes to cost reduction, it's when companies from first world countries outsource to third world countries where salaries will be cheaper, rent will be cheaper, and basically the whole operations of it will cost much less. And the next is quality improvements and customer satisfaction. When we talk about quality improvements, it's through outsourcing IS functions to a company that is an expert in this field. So it should be possible to deliver better quality services to internal and external customers. If the outsourcing third vendor will be a pro in it and well experienced in a specific function. So let's say may local bank and they wanted to digitize, create mobile apps, web apps. So instead of developing these applications themselves, which they have no experience in, so perhaps they might hire a third party vendor who has experience in making these specific apps for other companies. So the ending would be that they would get more efficient programs and products that can be used, and ultimately that also reduces cost. Third reason would be to enable the focus on core business. Going back to my example for number two with quality improvements and customer satisfaction. Once again, let's pretend this local bank would like to digitize. So if it outsources its digitization projects to a third party, they could still pour their existing resources to their core business, which is like banking, right? And then the fourth reason is it reduces risk of project failure. So I think it also describes point number two, since with an outsourcing with an with a third party vendor who has more experience in it in a certain project or function, the chances of producing the quality output is more high, and the chances of failure are reduced. Therefore, it reduces the overall risk. And for number five is the implementation of a strategic objective. I think overall, since some certain projects or units which the firm does not have an experience in, they can just outsource it and they can focus on what they do best. So I think that's the benefit of outsourcing. But outsourcing isn't only about, isn't without its risks. So Collins and Millen lists the following problems with outsourcing. So the first problem would be the loss of control of the information system. I think this is always a huge risk when you're turning over certain functions to an outsider. So it risks losing control of that function. And the next is loss or degradation of internal IS services. While outsourcing would give the company an opportunity to have a more experienced firm handling certain functions, that doesn't always mean that uh, the third party will always be able to deliver. So even if they have experience, there's still chance. There's still a big chance of having degraded services, since after all they aren't part of the company and they don't know how things work and all of this. And next is corporate security issues. Okay, so again, since the third party is an outsider, certain information uh, is quite risky to give to them, uh, since the information is going outside of the company. Uh, the fourth problem would be the qualifications of outside personnel. I think since the third party will be the one to source the employees and the workers to handle things, it's going to be difficult and out of the control of the firm to select when selecting the employees. And fifth is the negative impact on employee morale. Uh, as mentioned earlier, I think the outsourcing increases sometimes efficiencies or transfers specific functions to a third party. So maybe when it becomes more efficient, some of the existing employees can feel redundant, or if certain units are outsourced to a third party, some employees would also feel like their jobs are at risk and therefore have this mild sense of being one step out of the door when they feel like their job is on the line. So these are some of the most negative impacts. But I think one of the biggest problem is still added costs. So as mentioned, the primary reason companies outsource is to reduce costs, but it's not always saving them money. So first is when they don't identify the present and future requirements fully. So if you don't know future requirements, if you haven't predicted what will come up, it presents loopholes within the contract. And when there's loopholes, it presents an opportunity for the third party to like add some more bills for certain functions that they do. Okay, so and the number two is failing to identify the full costs and service levels of existing in-house operations. So when the firm fails to identify the full costs, it might end up going where the outsourced work would end up becoming more expensive than what it currently costs to do in-house. So that's why it's very important to be very detailed and know all the costs in and out in doing it internally. And then number two is the change of character clauses, prompting excess fees. So once again, it's relatable to part one, and software license clauses and all. Fixed prices, fluctuations in data processing volumes. So once again, so we discussed the main points in the first four. I think all of these just we discuss the problems in the previous slide in more detail. Okay. So in the end, also there besides the costs and inefficiencies, there are also human factors in outsourcing. During outsourcing, as mentioned, some units are either being transferred to uh, the third party vendor and canceled from the firm. So usually these employees would get improved rates of pay. However, since having improved rates of pay gives them time to uh, a time to renegotiate the contracts. So it may not be a better solution, since maybe some benefits of their previous remuneration package are omitted in favor of pay. So it depends on how it's all managed, and the employees also get better training uh, when they move to the outsourced units from the internal units. And the third is greater career opportunities for them, since moving to an outsourced firm gives them more external experience and more experience in different firms, right? So these human factors in itself aren't really arguments for or against outsourcing, but it depends on how the firm will manage uh, these uh, factors. Okay, so how do we manage the pros, the cons, and uh, the human factors of it? So the readings give us three main elements in order to manage these information systems. So we would call it the three elements of IS capability. So first is resources, second is competencies, and third is capability. Now, when we talk about resources, it talks about the assets that the firm or the company owns and controls. So it can be information, it can be licensed to technology or knowledge of it, and other stuff like that. And then the competencies is the ability of the firm or the company to use their resources to generate value. And for the third is the capability. Capability is the ability of the firm to use its competencies to meet the overall goal and the strategic goal of the company. So those are how the flow goes. That is how the flow goes when managing IS governance. So the following are the six IS competencies. So number one is strategy. Number two, define the contribution. Define the IT capability, exploitation, deliver solutions, and supply. So these are what uh, firms need to remember when managing their uh, IS systems. So here's a flow chart on how resources are on how resources flow to become capabilities, and also from the resource level it starts so as mentioned earlier, resources are the skills they have, the knowledge, the information. So at the organizing level, these knowledge this knowledge is processed and become IS competencies and so forth. Okay, so and another tool to manage outsourcing would be the COBIT framework, or the control objectives for information and related technology. So it's a framework for managing informations. So this is the COBIT framework. Uh, okay. So the requirements of the COBIT are effectiveness first. So effectiveness is the delivery of a relevant information uh, to be able to contribute to the business. And efficiency is, of course, the optimal use of resources. And next is confidentiality, integrity, availability, and compliance. When we talk about compliance, it's complying to some set of external rules. So this includes the laws, the regulations, and also the contracts signed between the parties. Uh, and lastly, it's the reliability of information. So reliability of information is knowing which information is appropriate, so such that the organization can continue to operate and for the management to exercise its fiscal compliance reporting responsibilities. And also here are the 5 resources and objectives of COBIT. So the first is the data, application systems. It's the next, technology, facilities, and people. So how do we know if the COBIT actually performs well? So the first key performance indicator would be the improved performance, so as measured by balance scorecard. So it's important as the company monitors um, its operations with the outsourcing party, that it measures everything and numerically and all. And the next is improved staff productivity and morale. So the third is increased satisfaction of stakeholders. Fourth is increased availability of knowledge, of course, in managing the systems. And the fifth is increased linkage between IS and IT enterprise governance. So if we are able to measure these 5 KPIs and see that they all have improved, we know that outsourcing was a good idea and it should be continued by the company uh, if we were to use the COBIT framework to assess if we should outsource or not. And so the next is the COBIT domains. The 4 COBIT domains can be considered as some sort of life cycle model. So the first is planning and organization, acquisition and implementation, delivery and support, and monitoring. So this is the flow chart of it. So once the business objectives are identified here at the top, so it provides information. So once we get the information, we should plan and organize how to use this. And then the next step would be to acquire what we need to meet the organizational goals. And the next is delivery and support. And once everything has been delivered, the only thing left to do is to monitor how the operations still go. And once again, we are left with an information, and we can go back to the cycle all over again to determine if it's still okay to continue uh, with the outsourcing. Uh, okay, so that's it. So that's the fourth learning objective. Uh, so to be able to identify how to manage these systems. So that's all. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
Are there any questions from the group right now? Okay, if there's none, any last words from Mikey, from Vlad?
I guess for me, uh, thank you for thank you for listening. And I think in terms of our presentation, the key takeaways will always look at the value of the investment and the business value that it's giving to the company, whether we're doing it in different ways and how we actually control the organization as well and see how the benefits take into play if ever we are outsourcing or not. So yeah, thank you guys for listening. Have a great Saturday. Okay.
Okay.